man. You cannot marry a woman without gills. You're from two different worlds. Oh, I've wasted my life.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. You're getting a double dose of Gervais this week. Obviously, he's here with me today. He'll be here on Thursday to talk about It's Complicated. Do a little bit of a wrestling show. But I wanted to talk about something a little bit more in depth today that came out of Comics Aficionados about what is the destination for comic writers and artists today. And obviously here with me is the man behind Animated Concepts, former assistant editor at Milestone Comics, and somebody that was looking to get into the comic book industry about 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But you had some bad timing. How you doing, Gervais?
I'm doing well, Wes. I'm doing well. Yep. It's like, as they say, timing is everything.
Absolutely. So, you got your
95 was good.
You got your gig at Milestone. You got your into the company, and then you put your resume out there to Marvel. And the feedback that you got was like, yeah, your resume is good. We would have a place for you, but I'm worried about my job right now because we're downsizing because the bubble had just burst. Yep,
exact quote was, "We're just lucky to keep our jobs." And as I was telling the story, it sounds like this dude was saying it from under the desk as they were burning and shredding files like they were at Enron or something. It was a terrible time. It was a terrible time, and it was strictly a timing issue. It was like the bubble had burst, the speculator bubble had burst, and as we know, at some time after that, Marvel ended up having to declare bankruptcy, and really, I think one of the great casualties of that time was that the way that you got into the business changed. It just did. There was a time in the business where if you worked either, and some people can still do that, you work either an office job or you literally like work in the mailroom and just like walk up to the offices and say, hey, look at some pages. One of my favorite stories of people breaking into the industry at that time was Chris Cross, who the way he broke into the Milestone office was he found out what the office was like the rest of us did. And he just stood there pretty much every day and waited for them to either go in and come out and just kept shoving pages in their face till he got in. Can't do that anymore by and large. You can't do that anymore, especially when it comes to writing. When it comes to writing, you'll be told pretty much that what you need to do is basically write for a bunch of indies. And really what they're telling you is you need to basically like have a really big self-publishing project, a create-own project that gets some news and exposure, get some heat, if you will. Or you basically write a New York Times bestseller. Those are the two ways to break it as a writer now.
When you put your resume to Marvel, there was no doubt that there were two destinations in the comic book industry. If you were going to be a creator, a writer, artist, or if you were an editor or somebody like that, you wanted to work at Marvel, you wanted to work at DC. But that's not really the case anymore. Things have changed a lot in the last 30 years. There's been a lot of the advent of a lot of new mediums. What are the destinations where people maybe will use a Marvel or DC exposure is to maybe go out there and work in network and television. We've seen a lot of comic book creators be very successful going and writing, or we've also seen artists go out there and do storyboarding within not only television streaming but also video games and whatnot. So in many ways, you might have your eye weight on a career outside of comic books, but this might be your way to get there by demonstrating that you can tell a story or you can visually present it as an artist.
Yeah. No, but that if we're going to be honest, that's always been the case. I mean, there are plenty of comic book professionals who've always had their hand in advertising. Even Jack Kirby did character designs for, I think, what was it, like Thundarr the Barbarian and stuff along those lines. So there was always, Chuck Patton worked for the Turtles. I mean, there's always artists going outside of the industry to do work. But you're right. What personally, and I even think professionally, they wanted to be doing comics full time, and you wanted to be doing it at Marvel.
That was a little side gig, so you can make a little extra money and keep making
exactly. Comics. Yeah, and then you keep doing comics. I think there was a desire to do that, and I think what's happened now is it's like kind of like there isn't that desire because basically it just doesn't pay well. It's like when I was doing research for compensation rates for animated concepts, to be like at least somewhat competitive in terms of getting talent. And even like back working the rates out from the outside in, I started realizing that depending on the experience of the artist, and I'd probably say under a year, I was pretty much almost could be as competitive as Marvel and DC in terms of those rates. So I just don't think it has the cachet. And I think a lot of what it goes back to is also the Image 30-something years ago. Image really started to show people that you could get actually maybe even more fame, definitely the fame part, more fame and celebrity, and definitely in some cases more revenue, more money than if you worked at Marvel and DC. And I think Image, as much as people like to sometimes discount it or, discount it because of the way they kind of fumbled the shot that they were given, they really bloodied the nose of Marvel and DC in terms of prestige. And that's what we're talking about. The prestige of working for Marvel and DC is gone, and especially now in this current tribal age of comics, which is very political, it's like there's so much of a love-hate thing going on that it's just like, honestly, people, if anything, you go to Marvel and DC now to basically use them as a springboard to do your own thing, to do your own personal brand in comics. So Marvel and DC are not seen as a destination. They're seen as they're almost a farming company. They're almost a farming company now. It's
part of the journey.
It's part of the journey. It's not the destination. It's like if you look at all of the breakout successes at Image and all that, they've always said there's no such thing as an overnight success, and that's true. But if you want to be perceived as that overnight success, then that starts at Marvel and DC. It doesn't end at Marvel and DC. So with the crowdfunding platforms, Kickstarter and Indiegogo, you look at Aaron Lopresti and how well he's doing with Wraith of God. Why is he doing as well as Wraith of God as he is? Because I've been following his work at DC in particular for years now. So he's already a brand name, a known quantity. So DC is definitely wasn't the end of the journey for him. His Marvel work when he was doing New X-Men. That's where I know Aaron Lopresti from. So when he says he comes on your show or he comes on your show and says, hey, I'm dropping it Indiegogo or doing a Kickstarter, I'm like, oh yeah, right over there and boom, because I know what I'm getting. But I know what I'm getting because of his work at Marvel and DC.
Absolutely. You see a lot of the writers nowadays, certainly James Tynion has decided, what? Batman, maybe it was a dream gig, but it's not going to define me. I'm not going to be defined as a guy that did Batman for so long. I'm going to do Batman, going to bump up the sales, get some excitement going on. I'm going to go maybe create another series over there at Image Comics with Department of Truth, go break some records with the initial sales there, go knock out a series at Boom Studios. Then I'm going to take my business over to Substack. He's rather go to Substack and self-publish through them his own stuff than write Batman, the flagship of the entire industry.
Yeah, and that's in a large part Marvel and DC's fault, because Marvel and DC have not treated the comic part of their businesses in a way that anybody would even be invested at this point or interested at this point. It's like it is not for Marvel and DC. Comics publishing is not the core of their business. It's not the core. It's not the focus of their attention. It's basically they relegated it in terms of their own business strategies. And if it's not well documented, it's well known. At best, it's marketing. It's really just research and development. It's like it'd been one thing if it was marketing, but it ain't even that. And it's just like because even with I think what his name, I forget his last name, but the guy Ike who took over basically Ike Perlmutter. His whole thing was
the toy company guy from Florida.
Yeah, exactly. His whole thing was that the reason why the movie business became so important, because the movie business was intended, you make money from it. I think they made a lot more money than they thought, than they probably dreamed and imagined. But the movie part of it becomes the billboard for all the licensing and the merchandising. And I think the way he looks at comics is part of the merchandising. This is the merch. This is the merch that we put out connected to the movie thing, even though none of it matches up. Whereas before, the comics were the core business from which all the other business activities flowed from. And that's clearly not the case anymore. So of course, is Marvel and DC going to stop making comics tomorrow? No, they're going to license it out to somebody else maybe. I'm not going to get into that whole debate. But the thing is that the only reason why even the licensing out to someone else becomes even somewhat of a possibility is because Marvel does not consider that its core business. Its core business right now is making movies. That's what their core business is. DC, I'm not sure what they're doing, but
well, you look at Marvel; they had a similar situation with Nick Spencer. He's writing Amazing Spider-Man, following up Dan Slott. People are really happy with it. You know, he's doing some interesting things, running a few storylines back. He's playing the long game with it. He gets another opportunity at Substack. You know, he doesn't even go launch a couple of new series on some creator-owned stuff on the indie scene. He just goes over to Substack, and you're sitting there. If you're Nick Spencer or maybe you're the Spider-Man group editor, you have to think, why wasn't the Spider-Man writer on an exclusive gig? Like, why wasn't he hammered down to knock out his entire storyline? Like, why wasn't that in the contract? It's because they didn't care. It was an afterthought.
Exactly.
Why would he leave? Yeah, he's on Spider-Man. Well, fuck you too.
Yeah. or part of it just is we weren't going to pay him that money anyway. We ain't trying to keep him. I mean, he's expendable. You know, we're just going to let a guy.
Spider-Man writer is going to be their top paid writer, right? That's the big book.
You would think, but I was saying you would think. It's like, look, man. It's like at this point, I think things are so much in flux, particularly with the corporate ownership of those companies, is that nobody knows exactly what they're supposed to do except whenever, I guess, the financial reports or the quarterly earnings reports come out, they just better make sure they're making more money than they're spending. So that could be playing just as much a role in this as why you don't, make sure that the Nick Spencer is on there. Because when the DC
is locked down for 3 years if he's going to be writing Batman.
Yeah, well, they should be, but again, that goes back to the fact is that Marvel and DC, with all due respect to everyone, and this is not a knock on the community, this is not a knock on the customers, this is not a knock on us who have, quote unquote, because I ain't using the word, supported the business for the years, in other words, who have paid money, who have bought their product. This is not that you are not seeing any kind of loyalty from the publishers to either their talent or to their customers in the last 5 to 10 years. And that's because there's no incentive for them to be loyal to the talent or the customers, because the thing is that all they have to do apparently is just bare minimum. I mean, I know it from someone who basically said it when it comes to the whole Feige situation. I know someone who's like, he doesn't see the prestige in comics that he does in the film. So yeah, he's a television producer. Yeah, exactly. It is what it is. It's like their whole thing is movies and Disney Plus. Movies,
money.
And,
you're not going to get the money that you're going to get with subscriptions or movie sales.
Yeah, and they've known this since the 90s, that basically no matter at least from their cost benefit analysis, like I said, I keep pointing people to Comic Wars, and I keep pointing people to a particular page where they basically laid out what the projections were for a few years out, and at that time it was just like, it wasn't that comics wasn't losing money, but it wasn't making money either. It was basically just going to be flat. What you put in is what you got out. And I think that at least that financial perspective has basically influenced and impacted and informed the whole publishing strategy for not only Marvel, but definitely for Marvel, but DC as well. And basically all that happened with the publishing companies is they just became R&D outfits to just churn out the next potentially breakout IP. And for them, I guess on some level, one of those breakouts has been Harley Quinn for DC, because they apparently keep trying to rise to the Batman.
They don't make a lot of money.
Yeah, they don't make a lot of money, but I guess the little animated TV show seems to be doing well. But that's what you're looking at now. So what was that last character that came out, Punchline? That clearly was what they were trying to do with that one. But that's the hope. The hope is that we who are, I guess, I don't know how many people are buying comics now, but let's say we who are 100,000 strong, maybe 150,000 strong, that's enough. That's statistically, if you get a book that does in anywhere from the 30 to 50,000 range and does well, that's enough of an indication that you can take whatever that property is and try to see if it'll do well in other mediums.
It's crazy, Gervais. It feels like the final nail in the coffin as far as Marvel and DC being a destination really was the pandemic shutdown. We saw all the messages about pencils down, and I think a lot of creators were sitting there and saying, you know what? I thought I was in the most stable position I could be in as a comic book artist. I was an exclusive artist at Marvel. Or maybe I was an artist with DC on one of their major properties. I'm not getting work now. Perhaps I did not see this clearly and what was really going on. I think they took an eye to say, well, what can I do to mitigate my risk? Because it's obvious there is a risk going straight with Marvel or going strictly with DC. And a lot of times I think they came to the same conclusion. It might be time where it's less risky to bet on myself, maybe do some crowdfunding, maybe go out there and do a Comixology exclusive. Maybe there's so many avenues to get comic books out. We got Tapas coming in. We've seen a lot of people from the industry going over there and stuff. And I think the shock to the system that was is maybe the people that thought that they were in the most stable positions possible realized that wasn't the case and really ended like that, the idea or even, the dream, the false reality that DC and Marvel were the final destination, and that it was time to look at something differently.
Yeah, because they weren't. There was a time, and I think this is the part that people miss, is that they're the destination because they had the capacity to be the final destination. In other words, there's a little thing called distribution, and there was a distribution infrastructure that existed over 30 years ago. Maybe that's when it started crumbling, but there was more than 30 years ago, there was a distribution infrastructure that existed where you couldn't go and do anywhere else what you could do at Marvel and DC. It was about the black and white boom where people started to realize, oh, wait a minute, especially with this new direct market thing, you can do something like a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and enjoy the kind of same success as a Superman or Batman. It's clear that what was going on. But now that's like 1 in a million or whatever it is. You'll have to be honest about that. You can't use Turtles as like an average. It has to be in some sense like an outlier. But then when I think it started to become like, oh, wait a minute, like the odds improved is when Image came along. But what Image is that the only difference between Image and everyone else, even Jack Kirby, who went off to create their own stuff, is that instead of going off to be one lone light in the darkness to doing it, all their top creators left at the same time. And they showed that even though at least one of them really wanted to run back to DC as fast as back to Marvel, DC as fast as he can, which was Jim Lee, and Liefeld just went back for the money, I think. They showed that if a bunch of you leave and you kind of have built that cachet or that reputation of Marvel and DC, you can go out and do your own thing. And now what's happened is, since Image, the distribution infrastructure has expanded to such a degree that they know now. So look at Substack. What's really going on with Substack, from what I understand, is they're saying, here's a bunch of money, do whatever you want with it, have at it, Hoss. Who's doing that at Marvel and DC? Who's investing in their talent up front to that degree, even though I've heard from plenty of people there's problems with the Substack model, but who's doing that kind of investment up front at a Marvel or DC? Nobody. Even when you look at a lot of independent companies now, like, we had talked about yesterday with Scout. It's like, even with Scout, they're just saying, look, we don't pay page rates or nothing. You're the one who has to do the creative team and everything else. And that's what I've been hearing in terms of your way into the comic business has been from the beginning. And that's why I didn't go back after for 30 years up until now, which is basically you run your own business, you build your own infrastructure, you put in all this financial investment, and then maybe we'll take a look at you, kid. Are you serious? Where's the destination? Yeah, you take all the risk. So if I'm going to take all the risk, then I'm going to shoot for Turtle money. I'm not shooting for DC and Marvel money. I'm going to shoot for Image money, or whatever Image money.
With The Walking Dead, on AMC, and now we have streaming. Everyone's got a streaming platform. There's an overwhelming need for serialized content so they can make streaming content with these shows. And it turns out that comic books, in a lot of cases, are perfect vehicles or perfect pieces of material to use that, perfect IPs to adapt. And why would you go create stuff for DC so it can end up on HBO Max and you don't get really paid for it when you can go make some stuff and get it on Amazon Prime?
There you go. No, and that's the thing. You're talking about Invincible now. So again, another Kirkman out of the park. And so that's what it comes down to. So let's never fool ourselves about this. This is about money. And it's like, for putting out the same time and effort, you have a much bigger upside. In some cases, an upside guaranteed, going out on your own than going to Marvel and DC where they take away all your rights. So basically they take away all your money. That's what it is. So I'm going to go create a punchline for DC that gets translated into all these types of media. And, maybe I don't know who created that one. Maybe he's got the right kind of deal that it makes sense to do that. Yeah, he's getting like 5% of whatever the gross. Okay, maybe he is, but That's one guy. That's not everybody working in the industry. And I have long been saying to people, I've tried to get people to come into like collaborations and collectives, but it's like, you know, there's a bunch of us who do the same thing together, write the right kind of contracts, keep your rights together, and crank out some good stuff. Because you're right. Now what's happened is that you have all of these distribution platforms that need content, and Marvel and DC can only produce so much. And the simple fact of the matter is, if you play your cards right, or you play your cards right and partner with somebody where you're the creative or you're the financial person, that it really does not cost that much money to basically get a one shot. Because in some cases, all you need is a one shot. All you need is a one shot in order to secure some of these licensing and merchandising, especially these licensing deals. It's just the question of, at the end of the day, it always comes down to, is your idea any good or not? That's it. But it's like Ralph Bakshi said this about animation at around the same time that the comic book industry was imploding. He was like, these guys are fooling you. There's no way that with the technology available, you can't like pick a room in your house or garage someplace, literally set up an animation studio, basically recruit a bunch of people from all over the world or whatever it is, and churn out an animated film or series and do what these guys are doing. The only advantage a publisher always had, I would say up until the last 20 years was that they had the capital, and they had the capital to basically produce the product and infrastructure. They had the capital and infrastructure to bring that idea to market. And now, especially these crowdfunding platforms, it's a little bit different of a kind of a product, but the infrastructure is there where any one of you, if you have the mind and the will to do so, you can get your ideas to market without having to go through Marvel and DC. I do not need to go to Marvel and DC to make a 64-page graphic novel. You just don't. So that's why they're not the destination anymore. And they don't pay nobody.
I want to say thank you very much to Jervain coming on here and talking about this, expanding on something that we kind of hit on in the aficionados. I really appreciate it. We'll see you in a couple of days on It's Complicated.
Absolutely. Take a break. Thanks, Wes.
Thank you.